Nice. All right, so this one's going to be kind of a mix of like the original kind of nutrition thing that we just kind of all have to go over. So it's going to be a little bit of like, academy or our first college health class. I don't know if you've taken that one yet. But then we're going to kind of go a step beyond that and kind of how that applies to like the world as a whole with obesity and the epidemic we got going there. It's kind of where we're going with this. All right, so there's two different types of nutrients. So there's micronutrients. So those are the smaller ones. Those are usually vitamins and minerals. So usually you think of like calcium, you think of things for your bones, and then like salt would be kind of a mineral. Those are the ones you think of the most often. Those are the micronutrients. Those are needed in very small quantities. And then you have the macronutrients, which are the things you need in large quantities. That would be your carbs, proteins, hydrates, water. Things I probably should have had some in here. Oh well, didn't get that far today. All right, so the numbers you need to know. So the recommended macronutrient balance is 55 to 60% of your kcals are going to be carbs. I think we got less than 35% need to be fats. And the hard one there is actually the less than 10% saturated. So all those things like your potato chips and French fries and all those really oily, yummy things, 10% of your calories should come from that. So that's why they say like eat in moderation. It's really hard to do. Hey, look at there. We got some in blue. That means that's probably a quiz question. So carbohydrate and protein intake is usually based on body weight. So protein is 1.2 to 1.7. And then carbs is 3 to 12 grams per kilogram of your weight. So we did our lab the other day, and I think I made you take it to kilograms at one point there, so you should kind of have a clue there on what it should be for yourself with your kilograms or not. So the recommended daily allowance, so the DRA, has always been bad. So they used to have RDAs on everything. So that one, so it was interesting because back in the day, I know this was before I was even in school. The RDA was what public school cafeterias had to go by. Like in order to make meals for grade school, high school students, they had to follow the RDA. They couldn't do it. So they came up with a new thing with daily recommended intake. And that's supposedly is a better way to figure it out, but they've still had the same problem with high schools and grade schools is they can't make a meal plan that the kids will actually eat that follows the whole recommended number here. I think I have it on here. I like how this one has the green, yellow, and red here. So I kind of already talked about those. So this is the value typically used as a goal for dietary intake. So RDA is calculated as equals to 2 standard deviations. So if you've taken stats class, hopefully you all have done that or will shortly. So RDA says like this is the estimated intake for 50% of the population. So when it says you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, well, that's for 50% of the population. I'm a little bigger than that, so I think mine was somewhere in like 2,400 is what I'm supposed to have. But somebody like Kate, who's a little smaller, is probably closer to like 1,800. My wife is right on the 50 percentile, 2,000 calories for her height and weight. So they do, RDA is for 97.5 of the healthy intake. So that's 2 standard deviations from the recommended average requirement. So there's a couple other ones here. So you'll have the, when you're looking at a food label, you'll have the average intake. So that's the recommended daily intake. Then red ones would be the chronic disease risk reduction intake. So if you're above this number, then you're probably going to be getting diseases of some sort. Usually the one they talk about the most is, I'll probably get to it later. Why is it killing me here? Cancer risks, carcinogenic. So the biggest carcinogenic thing that we talk about in nutrition is actually tobacco. That is a carcinogenic thing that gives you diseases. So lung cancer happens the most often, but there's one other substance. So spoiler alert, there's one other substance that lots of people eat, but not Adventists, supposedly. Supposedly. We'll get there. And then the other one with the tolerable uptake level would be the UL. So you basically just need to know what all these mean. The ERA, RDA, AI, CDRR, and UL. Those are just things you need to know. So example, sodium is usually above the chronic disease risk reduction intake. So if somebody's eating too much sodium, which a lot of us do, that would be a risk problem for somebody. So this is what they were saying about the standard deviations. So the percentage of the population. So the ERA would be this dead center. And then 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, either direction. So that's what that would look like there. Whew. I might need to go get some water. I had my first 5 o'clock morning for basketball practice today. So I woke up on my own at 5 o'clock. I was so excited for the first practice. My alarm was supposed to go off at 5:15. All right, so dietary guidelines for Americans. So greater than 19 years old, the recommended numbers, a little bit different, but pretty close to what we had earlier. General dietary advice is less than 10% are fats, added sugars, so that doesn't include like fructose, sucrose, so like natural sugars. If you're eating fruit, you don't count that as a sugar, but if you're eating candy from the tables out there, you want that to be less than 10%. Sodium is less than 2,300 milligrams. That's a tough one. And since we are in college and some of you may be of drinking age, less than 2 drinks, less than 1 drink for women. I don't drink at all, but that way you know what it is. So eat a varied diet for any micronutrient dense food. All right, the numbers. So when you look at a nutritional label, they have percentage of your daily value. And this is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. And as we said there, that may not be 100% for your height and weight. Might be slightly different. So you have your resting metabolic rate. We talked about that earlier as your energy expenditure when you're resting. So basically to move around for the day. Your basal metabolic rate would be very standardized. And that's basically, if you laid in bed all day long, that's your basal metabolic rate. So your total metabolic rate would be your basal metabolic rate plus the energy for daily activities and exercise. So that's how much energy for a whole day that you would use. Hopefully that's going to be a little higher than some. All right, things that we need to know for our quizzes. So carbohydrates is a molecular composition. So you have monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides. So one carbonation or one chemistry connection. Disaccharide would have 2 chemistries, and polysaccharide would have many. So examples of that would be glucose, sucrose, and galactose, different substances in your food there. Your brain and your spinal cord have lots and lots of glucose in them. And you can tell a person's glucose meter with a glucometer. To tell if somebody has a brain or a skull fracture, they will actually do a blood test. And if there's too much glucose in that blood test, they will know that the person may have a skull fracture. Fascinating, huh? So if you get a concussion, they might do blood work, and that's what they're checking for. So this would be your energy source is carbs. The consumption of carbohydrate is stored as glycogen. We already kind of talked about the other day. We already talked about that. So in athletes, hunger is often an insufficient drive for how much carbohydrate you should have. So insufficient carbohydrates are going to make you heavy and feeling tired. It's one of those that sometimes people have heard of the keto diet, where they're like, I'm not going to eat any carbs so that my body burns the fat first. Even though your body burns carbs first regardless. I know I've got some things in my house here that have some of that. So your body can tell pretty quick what it actually needs, and your needs are going to depend on what kind of athlete you are. Don't know if this is going to work. I'll give it a try here, see if I can actually get it up here. Nope, no good. Thank you for playing. So the Michael Phelps diet was 12,000 calories. We said the daily recommended for a normal person is how much? 2,000. So he's eating 6 times the amount of food. Now, I've seen some interviews where they asked him, did you eat 12,000 calories a day? He's like, more like 10. But they were talking about, here's his breakfast was like 3 egg sandwiches, a gallon of milk. For lunch, he would have a pound of pasta, more sandwiches. For dinner, he would have a whole pizza, another pound of pasta. It was just like, wow, that's a lot of food. And I've seen some videos of people trying to like eat the Michael Phelps diet on their own. So basically, all he did when he was training was eat, train for 3 hours, eat, train for 3 hours, eat, train for 3 more hours. But when you're exercising that hard for 9 hours plus a day, yeah, I can see why you would need that much energy. And it's almost all carbs. Really? That sounds fascinating. Another one is like football linemen.
I want to know the Tom Brady guy. They said he would never even eat a tomato.
Really?
So, like, what was he eating?
Sounds like, man, that would have been an interesting. Either one of those might be really good final papers.
LeBron James died. I need to know that.
LeBron spends $1 million a year on his body. That dude spends more time in the off season on his body than most people do, like during the season. Like he spends more time in the gym. He has like dietitians, and yeah, it's nuts what he does. All right, so dietary, the influence of carbohydrates here. So a low carbohydrate diet as they train. This is how much glycogen is in your muscles. And how fast, so a 2-hour training bout in 24 hours, that's where it would lower down to. And if you did another 2-hour training bout, and it just gets lower and lower. Now, a high carbohydrate diet, notice how much faster the body recovers when you have carbohydrates in your diet. So if you're actually exercising a lot, it is not a terrible thing to eat, especially for like basketball teams. If you're working hard in practice for 2 hours, hardcore, and you need to recover for another practice the next day, carbs are probably the way to go. And this was saying 70% there of your diet is carbs. Otherwise, you are going to get lower, and your chances for your legs to get cramps are going to go up. So the red falls quicker, but doesn't recover as quickly. So notice how if you kind of put these end ones here, these are lower, slower. All right, go down and less. So the relationship between pre-exercise muscle glycogen and time to exhaustion. So a high carbohydrate diet can go for almost 3 hours there, pretty close. So maybe that would be on like the test we did the other day where you were walking at a certain angle for a certain speed and they could walk for 2 hours before they got exhausted. Somebody on a normal diet is going to last about 100 minutes. Somebody on a low carb diet is going to run out at about a little over an hour there. 60 minutes. And that's because you have more sugar to pull from for when you're exercising. So I'm sure there was some exercise time to exhaustion. It was nearly 4 times greater on the carbs. No, I was hoping they would have some more details of what they were doing. So food has a glycogenic index. So it's another one you'll need to know for your quiz there. It's for your blood sugar response. I actually had a guy in practice today that their dad came to practice. And so I was like, okay, I heard, it took me about halfway through practice before I went and sat down and talked to him. So I'm like, so what's going on with your son? And he's like, well, my son has diabetes and he has something else, which I'm not going to tell you about. But he actually had 2 things on the back of his arm. So one was for one thing and one was measuring another, and his dad's phone. He actually had 2 cell phones on him, and one was to track his son's blood sugar. So he's like, yeah, if we have a problem, like his blood sugar gets too low, I have one of those high glycogenic index foods are what they would eat. So sports drinks, potatoes, cornflakes, pretzels, jelly beans, candy bars. That's what I was. That's the only time a blood sugar diabetic person gets to actually eat is when their blood sugar gets too low and they get to have like one of those. I remember my friend that he got to have those tiny little ones that you get at Halloween. That's the only time he could ever have candy. And it was just that little tiny square. I have seen people also use Gatorade Chews as another one that's high glycogenic and lots of carbs for that. So a middle one of those would be pastries, pita, ice cream, and a low one would be spaghetti, beans, milks, pears. So diabetics usually keep a high thing nearby them and a low one by them, depending on, so like they would have like a peanut sandwich and a candy bar nearby. So glycogenic is not a perfect thing. Each person's response to different glycogenic index is different. My mom has a version of diabetes, and there are some like carbohydrates, pasta puts her through the roof. But other ones like peanut butter don't affect her at all. So everybody's kind of different. So, but hopefully they know which one's theirs. But you as the exercise professional need to probably know that and make sure that if they are diabetic, like before you start any exercise with them, whether they're in your physical education class or one of your clients, do you have things for your diabetes ready and nearby so that if something happened, you knew where to get them to quickly? Those are all parts of the things that you know. Oh, here we go. So I have on here, rice is a carbohydrate with high glycolic index. So it'll be an interesting one to eat there if you needed it. So carbohydrate factors that increase with exercise time. So we do talk about carbohydrate loading a couple days before a big event. Usually like a marathon runner is going to have a lot of carbs a couple days before. Also eating carbohydrates during exercise. One of my people I follow is a mountain biking couple, and one of their montages are eating wins races. So the person that eats the most is going to recover, and they actually calculate it all out. I'm going to need this many calories for this 2-hour ride, so I need to eat this, 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 and this. And I remember seeing one of them, they were doing it was a 12-hour-ish run. It was 100 miles. And when they stopped at the aid station where their friends were being their aid people, the guy walked off with 2 turkey sandwiches with cheese, mayo, and he's riding with like half a turkey sandwich in each hand. I'm like, how are you riding a mountain bike with like the back of your hand on the handlebars and eating with the other one? Like it was just, but that's kind of, they were trying to get enough carbs to continue racing for, one person took 11 hours and the other one took 13 something. To do that whole race for 100 miles. And it was hard stuff. So the influence of exercise intensity on muscle glycogen stores. So someone going at 31%, they can go for 3 hours and they're only going to drop to about 40 there. Now, someone working at 150% of their VO2 max, they're going to drop really fast. Their glycogen stores, they're going to be exhausted. 80%, we were trying to get you guys to go at like 70% the other day, and 30 minutes was not long enough for most of you guys. So we should have either made it more difficult or, made it longer. All right, so this would be someone who has no sugar during the exercise. So like before they started exercising and where they got exhausted. So the red here would be pre-exercise, and then it drops really hard and they got to exhaustion. So subjects were, during sugar feeding trial, were unable to complete the 90 minutes at 70% of their VO2 max. What else we got here? Note the decrease in blood sugar, hypoglycemic levels with sugar feeding 45 minutes before exercise. So interesting. Too much sugar drops too quick. No sugar, and they could actually last longer. So sugar is not the thing you need before an exercise bout. Carbs would be, but not sugar. Interesting, even though they're kind of similar. Carbohydrates during exercise. So unlike pre-exercise carbohydrates, it does not trigger hypoglycemia. So improving muscle permeability for glucose, insulin binding sites are altered during exercise. Oh man, this is one I was going to look up. Sorry about that. Because we do have a newer version of the book, and I was hoping they might have some more information on that one there. Carbohydrates after exercise is essential. So glycogen resynthesis takes about 2 hours after exercise. So protein and carbohydrates help enhance that, and that's also going to help with your tissue repair, whatever you've broken down, whether you're lifting weights or you're in soccer practice, basketball practice. Keep an eye on the clock here. Woo! All right, moving on to fats. So fat is an essential for body function. So fat substrates, triglycerides, free fatty acids, and glycerol. Saturated fats versus unsaturated fats. So the total fat we said earlier was about 35% or less of your total kcals. 10% of that needs to be saturated, and cholesterol is going to be hopefully less than 300 a day. So free fatty acids are important for exercise because they delay the exhaustion after the glycogen is depleted. Your body cannot metabolize triglycerides. You actually have to eat it. So must break down triglycerides into that. So high fat versus high carbohydrate diets. If you have a high fat intake, you're going to have lots of circulating free fatty acids. Not the worst thing. High fat intake, though, is going to have a low glycogen storage. So this is not probably going to help a basketball or a volleyball player. Side note that I have on here is Alzheimer's. It could be considered the third type of diabetes. They say that maybe high fat and low carbs might delay Alzheimer's, which means a lot to me. I lost my uncle a couple of years ago, right after I moved here. So like right after my son was born. I remember going to his funeral in like December, and my son was 5 months old, and they had a baby picture of my uncle, and like my son and the baby picture were like identical. Like, oh my goodness. Couldn't believe it. It was kind of crazy. So that's a big deal to me, is if a high carb or high fat, low carb diet, because it's in my family. So maybe when I get older age, getting in that 50s, 60s range, that might be trying that diet a little more to try to delay if that's something that's going to happen. Because I have at least one uncle. Let's see what happens to my dad in the next 20 years or so. Protein, not a great energy source, unless you're dying. But you do need 20 amino acids. Some are essential, some are non-essential. So you want about 50% of your daily kilograms or kilocalories, a little under 8 or a little under a gram, 1 per day. Here are all the different ones. No, you don't need to know all of these. But that's just to give you what the essential and non-essential ones. So one of the things that a vegetarian diet is difficult on is getting all of the amino acids. So you have to be really specific. So beans and rice together make up a complete protein. Wheat and peanuts make up a complete protein. So peanut butter and jelly sandwich, beans and rice with Latino meals are a complete protein. But if you eat meat, immediately has a complete protein. So that's one of the arguments between vegetarian and non-vegetarian diets. There's that number again that you need to know, 1.2 to 1.7 grams per body weight. A little higher for an athlete, so make sure athletes need this much per gram. A couple slides ago, what was it for normal per kilogram? So it's 0.8 per kilogram for a normal person. An athlete needs 1.2 to 1.7. So something you need to know there. Endurance training is protein's a possible fuel substrate, but that's only after you've used up all your carbs and all your fat storages, basically. Strength training, though, it is better for a couple hours after for resynthesizing. So if you're lifting a lot of weights there. About 30 minutes after exercise is the note I have on here. The odds of excessive protein nitrogen are with good functioning kidneys are probably not going to have any issues. If you have kidney problems, though, getting a ton of protein may be a problem. So that's just something to keep in mind. Some people whose kidneys are not going well, or maybe they've lost a kidney, doing it and they're trying to like weight lift and bulk up, it might not be the best thing for them to have tons of protein. All right, vitamins. So small but essential organic things. They act as catalysts to factor your chemical reactions. We've gone over a few of them with like just how the muscles use potassium and nitrogen in order to get your muscles to work. So fat soluble versus water soluble. So a fat soluble is stored and it could probably have toxic accumulations. So one that I think of, I remember my grandma used to have vitamin K lotion. It looked like this, but it just said vitamin K, and she would put that on her hands, on her lips. Like, it was so weird. I'm like, I've never seen that. And it's not necessarily the best thing to have way too much of a fat soluble thing, because you don't just get rid of it. Water soluble, on the other hand, is going to be excreted through your urine. So if you think of vitamin C, for example, you've seen those packages of vitamin C that you put in a drink so that you can fight off infections or fight off whatever you have. Does it help? But most of it's just going to get excreted out in your urine. So like if your body doesn't use it, it just goes away. And so you'll have to keep over replenishing yourself. Don't know if it actually helps you get over being sick or not, but it makes people feel better. You can actually get sick from too much sunshine. What vitamin comes from sunshine? Vitamin D. So you can actually get sun sickness. I've heard of lifeguards getting sun sickness because they have to sit out in the sun for so long. And so it's really important to take breaks as a lifeguard in the shade, not just like any old time, in the shade. So in general, unless a vitamins deficiency exists, supplementations are probably not helpful. I do know that my doctor is telling us to give vitamins to our son, just to make sure that he stays up with everything. So we use it as a reward for him, his vitamin gummies. So when he uses the potty right now, do you get a gummy for that? We're like manipulating him so that he actually gets more vitamins and stuff. So the ones that are most popular here, so the B vitamins, so there's 12 different ones, and those are going to help your acetylcholine levels to help get your ATP production. Vitamin C is good for cell maintenance, collagen maintenance, antioxidants, getting things out of your body. Iron absorption is a vitamin C thing. So some ladies during that time of the month where they're losing blood, they actually can have trouble with having enough iron in their body. My wife, before pregnancy, was taking little iron supplements every once in a while because they call it anemic. So they didn't have enough iron. The other thing that they told her is you could take vitamin C to help absorb more iron out of your food. One more and then we're going to take a standing break. Minerals. So inorganic substances. Calcium is a big one. Bone density, nerve and muscle. Big one here. Osteoporosis, osteopenia. Anybody go to church and see that little old lady that's got a hunchback? So there's always one in every church, and that is osteoporosis at its best right there. She did not get enough calcium throughout her life. And it always seems to be females. Rarely do you see males. I think it's because males die too soon before they can get to that point with their bones. Osteoporosis is also why a lot of elderly, when they fall, they break their hip because their bones are not as strong as they used to be. My wife's grandmother, she fell, oh man, I don't even remember what year it was. It was like right after we got married, like that December. I remember watching the college football playoff. It was like the second or third college football playoff. And my father-in-law and I sat in the lobby of an ER, and Grandma broke both her forearms by falling and putting her hands on the ground. And she broke both of them, all four, radial, ulnar, radius, ulnar, all four. And they weren't like snapped in half, but they were all cracked. So she was basically in 2 casts like this for 6 weeks. She was like 95 years old. She's 105 and still going. Lord help us. My wife is going to outlive me. All right, take a standing break. We'll take a little bit longer. I'm going to go get some water. All right. So iron, we kind of already talked a little bit about iron. It's going to help with your hemoglobin levels, your myoglobin levels, and more specifically, getting oxygen around the body. So oxygen binds to the iron in your bloodstream and helps get it transporting around. If you don't have enough of it, that would be anemic. So we kind of already talked about that. On the other side, you could actually have too much iron, and that actually could mean toxicity for your body, which would be very bad. Sodium, potassium, and chloride. Sodium and potassium, or sodium and chloride, are in your interstitial fluid, so in between the cells. Potassium is another intracellular fluid. These are needed for nerves, keeping your cardiac going, pH balance, fluid balances. Excessive intake of any one of those is dangerous. In all honesty, lethal injection is sodium chloride. So when they do a lethal injection for a criminal, that's what they give them. It makes the heart go crazy. So too much of those is definitely very dangerous. All right, so your water and electrolyte balance. This will probably be the last 7 slides here we get to today. So 50 to 60% of your total body weight is water and electrolytes. And you can kind of see all the numbers there. So this is how you're going to transport, diffuse things. Water is a good thing. Your blood plasma level is basically water and electrolytes. So when we do the centrifuge, your red blood cells will be at the bottom, and then there'll be plasma. It's going to be a lot of electrolytes and a lot of water. But if you don't have enough of that, that's a very bad thing. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of giving plasma, like donating plasma. Anybody tried that here? I used to have scarring on my arms. My dad and my brother, they've got ones that look, it's probably about a ½ an inch long by about a ¼ inch wide. Because they would give blood or give plasma twice a week. The first time was like $20. The second time was like $60. I don't know why they have to compare them together. I don't know how it all works, but that's how they make extra money. And I know a lot of college guys that would do that. I don't think there's anything close enough here. In Lincoln, Nebraska, where I was, there was one within 15 minutes of the college. And it was actually kind of in between the University of Nebraska and then Union College. It was kind of like halfway in between. I was like, they're probably smart. There's a lot of college students here that like money. So water gain at rest is going to be 60% from beverages, 30% from your food, and about 10% from cellular respiration. Water lost at rest, so you're going to lose about 30% from your skin and respiratory, so just exercise there. Kidneys, and then large intestines and sweat. Now, where it changes is during exercise. So that's where your sweat's going to go up, and we've already talked about that's because of the higher blood pressure, or blood temperature, body temperature, and that's going to create a higher weight or water loss. All these things we've kind of already talked about. Environmental temperatures, wind, humidity are all going to make a difference there. And there's all the percentages and how much you're going to lose depending on if you are resting versus prolonged exercise. So sweating is going to be like 4 compared to 1,200 milliliters per hour. 91% of the total water loss is going to be from prolonged exercise. Where'd Caleb go? We just had 2 people poke their heads and wonder what was going on here. Water gain at rest, during loss, and during exercise. Nice little chart there to tell us what it is. So if water and electrolyte balance is going to be impaired with aerobic performance. So as temperature goes up, sweat loss goes up, performance goes down. Makes sense. Your plasma volume is going to go down. Cardiovascular, thermoregulatory is all going to go down there. The effects of on anaerobic and strength performance is actually unclear. Hopefully that's another one that would have a little bit more detail with the newer book that I didn't go through. I'll make sure I check on that before our next lecture. So electrolyte loss in urine, kidneys are going to experience, so urine production goes down, electrolyte goes down. And that's when you can see, like, I remember working at summer camp a ton, and they would always have a nurse that would come and be like, I know it's gross, but if your urine's bright yellow, you are dehydrated. Drink more water. We definitely had people at summer camp go to the camp nurse with dehydration, especially in Arizona. Oh, man. That one was worse than other places that I've worked. There's those percentages from sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, and then muscle. Oh, yeah. I'm not even going to try to say that one. And there's what it's coming out through sweat. And this would all be microliters per thousandth of a gram. Wow, that's tiny. Your thirst receptors are called osmoreceptors and baroreceptors. So high blood, low volume. So thirst is not really well calibrated with hydration levels. So basically, if you feel like you should drink, you're probably already dehydrated, is what that really means. And it can take 24 to 48 hours to fully rehydrate yourself. Benefits of fluid during your exercises: it's going to minimize dehydration, it's going to maintain performance, keep your cardiovascular levels going. So this would be the heart rate of 6 hours of treadmill running in the heat. That is a long time. So the red line here is somebody with no fluids over a 6-hour treadmill run. I mean, the only way to probably compare that to would be like a 6-hour hike. If you were trying to climb or hike to like Clouds Rest at Yosemite, that would be a 6-hour plus hike. So somebody who's having saline, so subjects receive a saline solution or water. Subjects were deprived of fluids to become exhausted and could not even complete these 6 hours of exercise. It doesn't say what level they made them exercise at. It just says treadmill running. It would just be a really long time to run in one place. I would get really bored. See if there's any others there. Heart rate stayed at about 130 for 6 hours for the people with water. Saline condition, so that'd be some sort of electrolytes, were slightly higher. So it still pretty much seems like water is the best thing for you. All right, we'll call this the end of the day for today. So hyponatremia is going to be a serum of calcium. So excessive calcium loss and excessive rehydration. Very rare. Ultramarathoners are the ones that are going to see this the most. I remember them talking about that. I was watching or followed a guy on, I don't remember what social media it was, but he was running across the United States in like 40 days. I don't remember how many days it ended up being. But he started in LA and he finished in New York. And he had a whole team helping him run. He went through, like 24 pairs of shoes. He basically, every other day, he had brand new shoes. He was running about 50 miles a day. And that was some of the things that they were worried about is excessive calcium loss. So symptoms of this would be bloating, puffiness. Feet is the first place you would see that. So like they were checking this guy's feet if they were swelling up, like the toes, they were getting too big. Nausea, vomiting, headache. More severe things that'll happen when this goes too far would be cerebral edema, swelling in the brain, cognitive or central nervous system dysfunction, edemas in the lungs, and then coma, death. So this is one thing. It's very rare, but it is when someone overly exercises, their electrolytes in water can get totally out of balance, and it can go poorly. All right, we will call that a day today, and